This is the Greg Bedard Patriots Podcast with Nick Cattles.
This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the app today. Use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. And as we always say, if you want to help us out, if you enjoy the pod, and if you're listening, hopefully you listen out of enjoyment and not out of hatred, then swing on by PrizePicks and help us by downloading that app and using that code CLNS. Also, take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account. Use that code. Again, it's CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Greg, let's get into a lot of what's been thrown out there over the past few days, reports, news, innuendo. We begin with Nathan Rourke. We hardly knew you. He has been waived. How's that quarterback room shaking out?
Yeah, it's interesting, Nick. I will say, not that I had any really frame of reference on Nathan Rourke. I mean, I know a couple of my members were like, when are you going to write up Nathan Rourke? Like, he could be like Brock Purdy or something like that. And I just no, I just put those things off as long as possible, and especially until I see him. Then if there's something there, okay, fine, let's delve into the guy. But we didn't get to see him. It surprised me a little bit, Nick, from this perspective. Like, okay, so we know the quarterback room is Jacoby Brissett, Drake May, and Joe Milton. I mean, at least for now. And then you have Bailey Zappi and you have Nathan Rourke. So now fast forward to, say, the season, and let's just say Jacoby Brissett is the starter and probably is for at least a quarter of the season, if not like half a season, depending on what happens with Drake May. And again, I'm not leaving out the possibility that Drake May couldn't win the opening day job. He could. I think the chances are low on that, but we'll see how it goes. So what happens week one as far as what's the pecking order? And if Drake May needs to sit, and what happens if Jacoby Brissett gets hurt, which happens a lot. I mean, look at the Browns where Jacoby, not Jacoby, he was in Washington, but you know, the Browns where Alex Van Pelt came from, they had to use 5 quarterbacks last year. So if the belief is Drake May needs to sit, and obviously Joe Milton's not going to be ready. We'll see if he even makes the roster. You know, he would probably project more as a practice squad guy. We'll see. But if Jacoby Brissett gets hurt in week one, who goes in? And it certainly so you're looking at an alternative, somebody that could get through a game. So you have Bailey Zappi and you had Rourke. My feeling was, you know, maybe it's Rourke. Maybe they feel comfortable with him in that role. And because, of course, anybody who listens, I'm ready for Bailey Zappi to be gone. But now I think with Rourke being released, you have to look at the very real possibility that Bailey Zappi could be not only make the team, but be the backup until they think Drake May's even ready to do that. And so it certainly makes for an interesting dynamic. Maybe they're going to be on the lookout for other guys, maybe another sort of veteran type guy as they go through. But I think as of right now, Nick, after this move, you would have to say the chances are pretty good that Bailey Zappi is still on this team come opening day, which, you know, post-draft, I thought after drafting 2 quarterbacks, I thought there were very low chances. But we'll have to see. Maybe they think they're going to be comfortable enough with Drake May that they're like, okay, yeah, he can go in and be the backup if possible. Certainly that's the Packer way to do it. Like I pointed out before, Aaron Rodgers, the first year he started after Brett Favre, they drafted 2 quarterbacks in that draft to back up Aaron Rodgers, who had never been a starter before. It was Brian Brom and it was Matt Flynn. And that's what they went into the season with. So are we looking at the same sort of thing here with the Patriots? It's a minor move, but the ramifications are definitely interesting.
It is interesting, and I would agree. Like, on the surface, it looks like Zappi is more likely to be on this team now than he was a week and a half ago. I do wonder if this has to do with possible trade conversations. Maybe they think, and look, I don't think Zappi's going to net them anything. He was cut last year. Nobody wanted him. But maybe the thought is, hey, if we hold on to this guy, at least he's played in the NFL. He's somewhat of a known entity. So we get him some more snaps. We kind of showcase him as much as we can during camp season and preseason, and maybe we can net like a 6th-round pick or something for him. Who knows? Maybe, maybe him in a 7th for a 6th. Maybe we can get something for him. That's really the only thing that would make sense to me. All right, let's jump to Calvin Anderson. Man, a video earlier today was released, and we all wondered what happened with Calvin last year. Obviously, he was out for most of camp. Then he came back. He played in the Eagles game. Then he missed a good portion of the season. And he told Chris Price, he told the world today that he contracted malaria. Now, the story is he goes to Nigeria every year with his family, and he comes back home from the trip last year before camp starts. His wife literally feels his body heat from him when they're laying down at night together, to the point where she's starting to feel warm. And so she gets up and she throws a thermometer in his mouth, and they end up taking an Uber. He's got a 105 fever. At some point in the hospital, he goes up to 108. He gets diagnosed with malaria. He gets through that, comes back. About a week before the season kicks off, Belichick tells him, you're going to play against the Eagles. He goes out there and he plays against the Eagles, and then he ends up with a heart contusion. So he literally almost died twice. Just an amazing story, and miraculous that this guy is still on earth, let alone still a professional football player getting ready for camp, Greg.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it obviously, good job by Chris, answering the question about what happened to, Calvin Anderson. We all knew that he had some sort of, pretty serious medical situation, but, the former regime obviously wasn't going to let that leak out, or even let the player leak that out. And, but we've seen stories sort of like this before. I remember there was that linebacker who I think eventually went to the Jets, who got into a car accident, and he ended up doing a big spread with the Boston Globe, like after that, about how dire the situation was, and things like that. So, as far as Anderson, my first thought reading this story was, and I'm sure we're all in this situation. Like, sometimes we go on vacation or we go to different places in the world, and there are certain hot spots for things. And, I understand his trip was humanitarian, really, and totally respect that. I mean, it's just sometimes you got to make choices, and this can happen in Africa, and so unfortunately he got malaria, and then all that set off different chain of events. My biggest thing is, and I remember watching the film on Calvin Anderson, I think he's a good, solid player. I don't know whether he can start. I don't know where he's going to be. I mean, basically, when you take a year off of football, and he was out there somewhat, but it's been a long time. I always thought he was a good, solid player, can play basically anywhere on the offensive line. Smart guy. I'll be interested to see what he can do. I don't, he's always been in part of my plans about what's going on in the offensive line. I think he's going to be in the competition, certainly at left tackle, or whatever they decide to do at tackle. He could get in the mix at guard as well. But I do think he's a good player, and hopefully his playing strength is back full, all that, he's ready to go, because I do think he can contribute to this team.
Yeah, when you're dealing with malaria and have a 108 temp, and then you have a heart contusion, I think it's safe to say we can wipe 2023 off the board for Calvin Anderson and give this guy a clean slate and see, hey, when he's healthy, what's he look like? And like you said, the playing power, is it back? And that's what I thought. And by the way, you were talking about Harvey Longy, who was the linebacker that got in the car crash. But I was thinking about today when I saw this video with Anderson. You're right, Greg. Okay, so maybe he can end up being a piece, and maybe you kind of throw him along out there with Okorafor and Wallace, and now you've got three guys, and now it's a three-man competition, and hopefully one out of those three guys can hold their ass together at left tackle. Hopefully, we'll see. All right, Christian Gonzalez, another guy who was out for a while last year, of course. The shoulder injury took him out for the rest of the season. He spoke with the media today, Greg. He says he feels healthy, but he is unsure about his participation level at OTAs. Take anything from that?
Yeah, he's definitely got to slowly build up his strength, and I'm sure he's fine. But if I'm the Patriots, I'm overly cautious with Christian Gonzalez. The Patriots don't need him, getting mixed up with somebody and aggravating the shoulder. It's been long enough. I'm sure he's fine. I'm sure the doctors have cleared him. But look, this kid is one of the franchises on defense for this team. And when people talk about the Patriots prospects for next year and are they going to be better on defense and blah, 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 taking Christian Gonzalez off the field last year was a huge blow. The kid, when he got hurt, was just, he started fast, but every week he was getting better. And he has that ability to shut anybody down. I thought it was a great draft pick by Belichick. And so he's a big key. So there's no reason these OTAs, the defense, they all know what they're doing. They've been in this scheme long enough. Yeah, I'm sure they're going to tweak it a little bit with DeMarcus Covington and Mayo now being in charge. But this is really about just crossing your T's, dotting your I's, knowing where to start for training camp. And just the goal should just be get Gonzalez healthy and strong to training camp, and then we'll see what happens.
I still think, and I agree with you on all points with Gonzalez, the dude has all the fixings of a stud. I do think the outside corner number 2 is still one of those question marks about this team, and it's going to be interesting to see. It feels like, Stephon Gilmore's out there, and the latest is he's not close to a contract with the Panthers. He's available if they wanted to go after him, but it does seem like Elliott Wolf and Mayo are looking at this, and Covington, and saying, okay, well, we've got some young corners, and let's see if one of those guys will pop, right? You got Alex Austin, you've got Isaiah Bolden, you drafted Dial. Maybe one of those 3 guys pops for us, and then we can move Jonathan Jones around. So I think that the competition, and Greg, I'm sure we'll talk about this more as we get closer to camp, but the one thing, we can sit here and debate the who's as far as this roster goes, but the one thing that Wolf and Mayo have certainly focused on is competition. And this camp is going to be heavy with competition. You can look at offense and say, there's like a handful of guys that we know are going to start week 1. Everything else is up for grabs. And there are some spots defensively, free safety, outside corner, slot corner. How does all that mix come together? It's going to be very, very interesting to see that competition, even at quarterback with Drake and Jacoby. Can Drake push Jacoby quicker than we think? It's going to be a fun camp, I think, and it's going to be a lot of competition, which I think is what you should do after a 4-win season. All right, let's talk about Elliott Wolf. Just mentioned him. Lots of reports yesterday, overflowing with reports, Greg. The Patriots have started their GM search, but it's not really a GM search. It's a primary football executive search, de facto GM search, president football. Who cares? Who gives a shit about the title search for the Patriots? They have since been turned down by 2 gentlemen. Quentin Harris, formerly of the Cardinals. I don't believe he currently has a job, from what I read. And Trey Brown, who was brought up a lot on this podcast and other places, of Cincinnati. Both those guys have turned down an interview with the Pats. What are you hearing? What's happening? Does the rest of the league just look at this and go, yeah, okay, we get it. I'm not going to interview. This isn't even a legitimate search.
Yeah, like we talked about, and we talked about it on the last mailbag podcast, where we got a lot of questions about Wolf and the job and the search, and like we said at the time, the Patriots were going to do a search. It's highly likely that it's Elliott Wolf's job at the end of the day, and the rest of the league looks at this as a joke. And I think this whole entire process, what the Patriots have done, is a joke. And from what I understand, the reason that they didn't do this search in January after Belichick was dismissed is because they were more focused on filling out the coaching staff, and they didn't want to lose more time and all this stuff. And it's it's a joke. Just to remind people, the Rooney Rule says that clubs must conduct an in-person interview with at least 2 external, diverse, minority and or female candidates for any GM or head coaching interview. And we talked about this at the time with the Mayo contract, which, the stipulation is contract that if he's the successor to Belichick.
Right.
And we talked about the Rooney Rule at the time, and I criticized the Patriots, and I stand by that. And a lot of people will say, well, they ended up hiring a black head coach. That's not the spirit of the rule. Even if it was Josh McDaniels was here, they could have had the same contract stipulation and done the same sort of thing. It just happened to be that Gerard Mayo was black. That doesn't mean you sidestep the Rooney Rule. This is sort of like a technicality. Succession plans, and we were critical, or at least I was critical at the time of it, because the spirit of the Rooney Rule is to expose minority candidates to as many teams as possible, because you just never know. And I said at the time, it was a joke that Gerard Mayo got the contract language when he never even had a job offer to be a head coach someplace else. If he did, fine, do it. I understand. But he didn't. He wasn't even a finalist anywhere. So that was a joke. What they should have done was they should have opened it up. And back to the spirit of the rule is, say there is, some sort of minority head coaching candidate. The Patriots have to bring in people and talk, even if they're going to end up hiring Gerard Mayo. You never know. The Crafts might get blown away. And then, for example, as we now know, Robert Kraft is close with Arthur Blank, who had a head coach opening this year. If Kraft conducted interviews first and some candidate blew them away, but they still wanted to hire Gerard Mayo, Kraft could have gotten on the phone when he was crap talking Belichick and said, you really need to talk to this guy. Yep. We were very impressed with this guy. That's the spirit of the rule. And now that the Patriots, they don't have the contractual thing with Elliott Wolf, they don't have the succession plan, now they're making a mockery of the Rooney Rule again. And to me, I think the Patriots should be fined at the end of this. I would be surprised. They're going to have to find a couple people. It's very alarming that Trey Brown of the Bengals, who knows Gerard Mayo, who used to be with the Patriots, even turned down an interview. They know these are sham interviews, and I can't believe the Patriots are doing it this way. They just should have gone through the motions in January, interview a couple people. They could have done whatever. Everybody knows after the Patriots had the 3rd overall pick, $100 million in cap space, what's the point in interviewing for the job now if they let Elliott Wolf do the job? So I just think the Patriots have egg on their face with this whole thing, and it's embarrassing, and it shouldn't have happened.
Lot to unpack. Let's first clarify a report that's out there from Ben Volen saying that the Patriots complied with the Rooney Rule. And I think people looked at that and they took out of it, well, so they're not doing these interviews because of the Rooney Rule. Doug Kyed and Andrew Callahan of the Herald have just updated that. And here's the deal. It's a little semantic-y, if I can create a word, but I just want to make sure that people listen to this podcast, they get the right information, and you and I, report what's out there, and we tell you the details of things. So the detail that's missing from what people are talking about with Volen is that the Patriots were in compliance, and this is what Andrew Callahan tweets out. They were in compliance with the Rooney Rule this offseason because they did not open up an official search. So they had complied because it wasn't an official search. They weren't trying to find a primary personnel position. So therefore, the NFL said you complied because there was no change in title. Nobody was going to take over that number one job. Now that they've opened an official search, Callahan says, according to the NFL, they must satisfy the Rooney Rule. So that's the semantics kind of let's thread the needle thing here. They had complied with the Rooney Rule before the offseason, before the draft, because they had made the decision to not try to promote somebody like Elliott Wolf to that title or bring somebody
right.
From
he
the
kept
outside.
The same title, director. Yeah, Wolf kept the same title, director of scouting. So technically, they didn't have a quote unquote opening.
Right, and so that's how they complied, quote unquote. But now that they're going to give Elliott a title that's different than what he has currently, or at least entertaining it, they now have to open up the search, and then the Rooney Rule comes in to apply, which Greg just went through. As far as how this process played out, it's the Mayo trickle-down effect. That's what we're witnessing. I said it back then. I'll say it now. As soon as Gerard Mayo was promoted, soon as that was put into his contract, it was more likely than not. I know some people get triggered by that term.
Including Tom
But
Brady.
it was more likely than not that Elliott Wolf was going to be in this front office as the lead guy. Because once you made Mayo the head coach, once he was promoted to that spot, you now, I think, have to go with somebody who agrees with Mayo as far as overall vision, philosophy, has a relationship with him, and they have that trust. So as soon as Mayo was promoted, it was a fait accompli to a point. And it's very much unlike, the Washington situation, for example, where they bring in Adam Peters, then they have the head coach search, then the GM picks the head coach. And I don't want to put words in the mouth of Greg, but I think both he and I believe GM should come first when you're kind of rebuilding things. Get the GM straightened out, have the GM pick the coach, and then you move forward. Here, it was back asswards because you had Mayo written in his contract that he was getting the gig. So once that was done, it was, okay, Mayo, who do you like? Who do you want to work with? Well, I get along with Elliott and I trust him. All right, well, we've got all of these people in this front office. Their contracts are coming up. If we bring somebody from the outside, it might not work out with Gerard. If we try to bring somebody in and put him over the top of everybody else in this front office, it might turn into a train wreck. We don't want the people that are lame ducks looking at the ends of their contracts. We don't want to get rid of them and have a bunch of turnover in the front office. So we're just going to kind of chill. We're going to let the people do what they do in their positions. We're not going to go with the title because if we do that, we now introduce the Rooney Rule, and that's going to take time away from Mayo and Wolf and the process during this big offseason. So we're just going to let this thing play out as is, and we'll go from there. Like, that's what happened. But the major domino that started it all was Gerard Mayo and the decision by Robert Kraft to put that in his contract and to promote him. And so that was, I think, even if Mayo works out, that was the biggest mistake within the process, was the Gerard Mayo part.
Yeah, I just think the Patriots, the whole process from soup to nuts on how we get here. And I don't mind where they
Right.
got. Like, at the end of the day, if the Crafts believe in Gerard Mayo, they believe in Gerard Mayo. And I have a lot of respect for Elliott Wolf. He certainly has the experience. He's certainly qualified for the job. So I don't mind where they ended up. But the process from even, a year ago when probably this Mayo contract nonsense began, and let alone the trickle-down effect with the coaching staff last year and all that stuff, it's just been just a complete train wreck, in my opinion. And the Patriots look like a joke to the rest of the league with how they're doing this. And unfortunately, for Gerard Mayo and especially Elliott Wolf now in this situation, should he eventually get the job, which we all pretty much think that he's going to, it just puts a little bit of a stain on it. And it just didn't need to be that way.
Yep. The contract agreement with Mayo really stopped them from even thinking of, okay, who could be the next guy as they were moving. They knew they were going to pivot from Belichick.
Mike Vrabel.
And so it kept them from turning over any rock. It was done. It was written. It was over with. And that led to, okay, well, the GM search, for all intents and purposes, is over with. By the way, we can update you. Greg's buddy, Burt Breer, tweets out another name that has turned down the Patriots. Bill's director of player personnel, Terrence Gray, has politely, according to Burt, politely turned them down.
Oh, politely.
So
he politely turned them down. Is that how it works?
You know what? I really appreciate the opportunity to interview, but I'm going to politely turn you down. Okay, great. So that's where we're at.
PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less in 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level. during basketball and hockey's postseason, which is coming up. I can't wait. I know Nick is going to be freaking geeked up for all that stuff. That's for sure. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into 1,000 with basketball, hockey, baseball entries today on Prize Pick, America's #1 fantasy sports app. This week on Prize Picks, I'm selecting Jaylen Brown for more than 25 points, David Pastrnak for 2 goals or more, Tyler O'Neill, the big thumper, for 2+ home runs this week, and Kenley Jansen for 2 saves. Download the app today and use code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy at Prize Picks.
All right, so Greg, let's move on to something else here. We'll do draft because you did your annual redraft, and you compare this with what the Patriots did. So we'll quickly go through the Patriots because we know what they did. May, 3rd overall. Jalen Polk trade, 34 and 137 to the Chargers for 37 and 110. Polk was the pick there. Then they decided to stick and pick the rest of the draft. Caden Wallace, Layden Robinson, Javon Baker, Marcellus Dial, Joe Milton, Jaheim Bell. That was the Patriots draft. Greg looked at this and said, well, what if I was Elliott Wolf? What if the Crafts decided to have an actual process and interviewed me for GM, and I got that job and I was running the draft room?
You're damn right.
So here's what Big Greg came up with. You stuck with Drake May at number 3. That should not be a surprise to anybody who's listened to the podcast. We were both fans of May. We both believe they made the right move by picking him, so there's that. You stuck with Jalen Polk. You stuck with the trade, 34-137 to the Chargers for 37 and 110. Why did you decide to stay there, and why did you decide Polk was your guy?
So, I went through the exercise in my column at BSJ where, I looked at possibly trading up. And for one, I might have looked hard at offensive tackle, and I would have tried to get, when, Morgan was on the board, Tyler Guyton was on the board. I tried to get back up for one of those guys because I think they were sort of the bottom of the first round tackle tier where you could see, all right, this guy has possible left tackle traits. And so I tried to get up, but the Packers, who needed a tackle, Bakhtiari's gone. The Cowboys, who need a tackle, Tyron Smith is gone. They wouldn't budge. They were happy as hell that their guys were on the board. They weren't budging. Now it gets into, do I really want to extend myself to trade back up in the first round for one of the wide receivers, Xavier Legette, Keon Coleman? To me, Brian Thomas Jr. was really the end of to me, no doubt, impact, not many warts on this guy type of wide receiver that could be a number 1. When you get into Legette and Coleman, they all have their drawbacks, and Polk is slightly behind them. Legette, I don't know. I mean, he's a good prospect. He's big, he's strong. I didn't love him. Keon Coleman, I liked a little bit more just because of his athletic ability. I think he has a chance to be dynamic, but I really didn't see that much of a difference. I would be okay waiting to see if something else happened, sitting at 34 in the second round. If one of those guys dropped to me, great. If neither of them does, then maybe I look to trade down. And that's what happened. And then I'm hoping that that Polk falls to me at 37 because I really want to tackle. That was the higher priority for me. So I don't want to shoot my shots on wide receiver at this point because I think that wide receivers, I think you can get them throughout the draft. And so I decided to stay, and I took the trade down from the Chargers because I do like Polk. I think he's a little bit below those guys, but that's why I stood pat. I did exactly what the Patriots did with the first 2 picks.
All right, Greg changed it up, though. He decided to trade up from the 3rd round pick at 68 to move to 63. The trade up was with the San Francisco 49ers. And with that 63rd pick, Greg picked somebody that we've heard this name an awful lot. Kingsley Suamataia, the offensive tackle from BYU. So quick thoughts on why you made that move.
Yeah, so, I'm sitting at 68 in the third round, and it gets to the bottom of the second round, and now, you're waiting for the run on tackles. The next guys who have possible left tackle traits. Definitely not, once you got past Guyton, it went from Guyton at like 29 to Patrick Paul got picked by the Dolphins at 55. Like, as soon as the Paul pick happened, I would have been nervous. And, this is my biggest criticism of the Patriots draft. Like, I don't mind the wide receiver thing. Other people who love wide receivers, who love fantasy football, that's their big second guess. To me, it's the second flight of tackles. And when Paul went off the board at 55 to the Dolphins, Elliott Wolf should have been on alert. And maybe he looked at the board and underestimated, like, well, these guys aren't going to take tackles, so one of these two guys is going to be there when we pick at 68. I would not have waited because you're talking about the second flight was Patrick Paul, Blake Fisher, Roger Rosengarten, and Suamataia, or however you pronounce it, Kingsley. So I would have been trying to trade back up, and so we know that Kansas City traded up with San Francisco, and you go through the differing trade charts. The San Fran gained 7 points in the deal. All right, it's a good deal for them. I mean, not outrageous, but I would have been on the phone with San Francisco and said, all right, well, what do you have? And I would have countered with the pick that I picked up from the Chargers, 110. That trumps Kansas City's offer to come up. That's what I would have done, because I think Kingsley is sort of the last one that if he was still on the board, I wasn't going to wait. So I gave him the 110. It's a slightly better deal than the one that Kansas City sent to San Francisco. And I moved up and I took Kingsley because I think he has a chance to play left tackle in this league. I think the chances are very low that Caden Wallace does.
All right, so the one thing that, and I think I mentioned this last week with the idea of, trading and what pieces you're giving up and what that means. In essence, Greg decided at the end of the day that he would rather have Suamataia instead of having Wallace and Javon Baker. That was the decision that he made. I'd be interested to see how Patriots fans would feel about that. Like, would you rather have Suamataia or would you rather have Wallace and Baker? I think it's a debate, and that's why I don't think it's necessarily an easy call, and I'm glad. Here's the one thing I will say, and this ain't blowing smoke up his tuk-tuk, but when Greg does these things, he puts the work in, and so he looks at the board, and he says, all right, these are the play. And so I think that's debatable, but at least know that Greg has a reason why he did what he did. He went through the process. He looked at the picks, and he's giving you a legitimate, realistic possibility for the Patriots. It's not throwing it up against the wall. And I think a lot of it has to do with Wallace. If Wallace can be, if Wallace can be 80% of what Suamataia ends up being, it's not even a conversation. If Wallace is like out of the league, or they got to move him to guard, or he's just lost for 2 or 3 years, and Suamataia starts to thrive in Kansas City, well, then you also have to look at Baker. If Baker hits his upside and ends up being a legitimate X receiver at the NFL level, now you don't feel as bad as taking, Wallace and Baker. So it's really the odds. I mean, if you want to break it down to the simplest form, it's the idea of Wolf taking a bet that one of Wallace or Baker are going to pop. So even if Suamataia pops, he could, he looks at it and he can justify it by saying, yeah, but I wouldn't have had Baker, or I wouldn't have had Wallace. And so I got both guys. And if both guys pop, then he looks like a freaking genius. How unlikely that is. But if it happened, then it's like, oh, man, he had it figured out. So that's why I love the draft process and what goes into these decisions, because they're not easy. And Greg went through it with the wide receiver situation. they're not easy decisions. There's a lot that goes into it. And, I've done a lot of radio. I get it. Context isn't always king with radio. A lot of times it's the opposite. So you don't get all the details, and you don't really look at, okay, well, what happened? It's easy to say, oh, they should have just traded into the 21 pick and got Brian Thomas Jr.
Right.
Okay, what else happens? So, Greg and I, we try to give you the what else. All right, so let's move on.
Nick, we'll just add one thing. So, and you make a valid point about Baker and about basically two players for one, and I get that. So my thinking with that was, like, I do think Baker has a chance to hit. Now, he does have character red flags. We'll see if that manifests itself or not. Sometimes it does. Right. Sometimes
can I just
doesn't.
jump in? I want to jump in for a second because you said that the last pod.
Yeah.
I don't know if people know that. Like I know they know that he transferred from Alabama to UCF. They see the IG stuff, and some of them might wonder: is there anything you can tell us that you've heard about possible red flags?
I don't have anything definitive yet. I'm working on that. I do know at least two teams didn't have Javon Baker on their board due to character concerns. I don't know what those were. And also another team, and Jaheim Bell, the 7th round pick, was off one team's board. Now I don't know why. That could be medical because he had an ACL and then he had a meniscus in the same knee. And when you get into meniscus, you get into, is there going to be cartilage for a very long time? That sort of thing. Same sort of thing that we saw with who was the Mitchell wide receiver that popped as a rookie for the Patriots. Yeah, Malcolm Mitchell. So that could have been medical. I don't know. But from what I understand about Baker was character red flags. Obviously the Patriots were comfortable with it, at least in the 4th round. I don't have a problem with that. In the 4th round, I just decided that I would look to take a receiver later, which I do. Right. Does he have the upside of Javon Baker? I don't know, but I just think that the draft is filthy with the receivers, and I'll take a future bet later on.
And we'll talk about that future bet in a couple minutes. But first, we look at pick 103. We know the Patriots drafted Layden Robinson, guard out of Texas A&M. Greg instead went with Theo Johnson, tight end from Penn State, a physical freak. He did a lot of special things at the combine. And I'll marry this with the 7th round because I found it interesting. You did pick Jaheim Bell, just like the Patriots did at 231. So you double dipped at tight end. Why'd you do that?
So for this reason, first of all, a couple things that we're not working with as much knowledge of the Patriots, but all we can do is look at what they did. So, they took Layden Robinson, a guard, after they just took 3 interior guys the year before. You have the Cole Strange injury. To me, that leads me to believe that they have some concerns about the interior offensive line. I read the Jaheim Bell pick as a scheme pick. And so that maybe Alex Van Pelt is saying, I need sort of an H-back, full-back, some sort of versatile guy. We don't have that on the roster, but I want to take a look at that at least in my scheme. So that's why I took Bell as more of a scheme fit than a quote-unquote tight end. I don't think he's a tight end. I think he's some sort of H-back, fullback type of guy. We'll ultimately see where that happens. But to me, you have Hunter Henry signed to an extension. Hooper's a nice guy. Again, tight end was a position that Belichick whiffed on last year in the draft, along with tackle, to screw, with the personnel of this team. And so I just wanted to finally address it. I wanted to get a guy with upside that maybe could sit and learn from Hunter Henry and possibly, pop as like as a nice weapon for this team sometime down the road.
All right. Then Greg comes back. Of course, he doesn't have pick 110 because he dealt that to San Francisco to move up. So at pick 180, this is when Greg dips into wide receiver for the second time in his draft, and he picks big, and I mean big, Johnny Wilson from Florida State instead of picking Marcellus Dial, the cornerback out of South Carolina.
Yeah, I wanted a wide receiver. I wanted somebody different, some sort of physically different guy. And Johnny Wilson, look, the chances of him at his size, he's 6'6". He's 6'6.5", 231 pounds. I'm looking for his 40 time. Where is it? 4.52. I mean, it's not terrible. I mean, I don't know what did Polk run? Like
close to that, I think.
4.6, 4. Yeah, somewhere around there. But just the physical profile, like, some sort of boundary guy that
just
can,
to jump in, Polk ran the same thing, 4.52.
Yeah. So you're talking about a freak athlete. Definitely has a long ways to go, and he's a bit of a project, but something that, I would like to see how that works in this offense. And the Packers they've always put a priority on, height, weight, speed. I thought this guy matched it, and this was my sort of future bet. Most people projected Johnny Wilson to go in the 4th or 5th round, and here I am. And this has been a theme with, Theo John. A lot of these guys lasted longer than they were originally projected. I'm getting him in the 6th round. I'm okay with that, and sort of taking the Javon Baker place.
And I know a lot of people like Brendan Rice, the son of Jerry Rice, and he
Yep.
fell, right? I mean, he plummeted. So that's another opportunity you could have taken advantage of.
The Celtics have vanquished the Heat and are now on to the Eastern Conference semifinals, where they will have home court advantage again. Who wouldn't want to be at TD Garden to soak in the great atmosphere there? Well, GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets, and it's super easy. I love the seat view component, Nick. I don't know how you feel about it. I will not buy tickets to any sporting event unless I can get a view on where the seats are going to be. Maybe I have a little Fenway fatigue, but on the app, it says right in there, when you're about to buy those seats, they give you a panoramic view of the seats. I love that component of it. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app and create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right, let's wrap up the draft talk here, Greg, before we move on to the Tom Brady roast. I'm dying to know how you felt about that. But you did draft a guard, and you drafted the guard in the same spot where the Patriots drafted Joe Milton. You drafted local guy from Boston College, Christian Mahogany. So you get him instead of Layden Robinson.
Yeah, I really liked him at his pro day. This is a guy who at one point was really highly thought of, and then he went through a little bit of an injury issue, but he's been fully healthy. He's a really good, smart player. I went with this pick because I'm going off the Layden Robinson pick. If the Patriots thought they needed to take another interior guy, maybe I should, because they think they need to be covered on the interior. I think that Mahogany's better than Layden Robinson. I'm getting him in the 6th round at 193rd overall. I think he's highly underrated. Can play in the league in multiple spots for many years. I was very happy that Mahogany was on the board, and sort of I'll delay the quarterback selection a little bit just to make sure I'm buttoned up at guard.
And you delayed that quarterback pick until 221, and you pick Michael Pratt from Tulane instead of Bazooka Joe, which I'm disappointed in you just because Bazooka Joe's Bazooka Joe, and I want to see bombs. But you went with Michael Pratt out of Tulane.
Yeah, so this was the pick I picked up from the Chiefs in the trade up for Kingsley, and so this is sort of a extra pick. This goes to what we were talking about with the Nathan Rourke release about, like, all right, well, who's going to be the backup? And I definitely wanted another quarterback, and who knows, Joe Milton might have been on the board, but I want more of a sure thing, a guy who stands a chance to be that Brian Brom or Matt Flynn to Drake May, where he has a chance to be the backup. Like he would supplant, and this is a guy who's, almost 6'3", 217 pounds, decent arm strength. I liked him at the Senior Bowl. he's more pro ready to me, and Joe Milton is certainly a future bet that you're hoping, it's a lottery ticket that you're hoping pays off. Michael Pratt is more of a guy who, you talk to most NFL scouts, they're like, he's definitely at least a backup in the league, and he has an outside chance to be a starter. And so Pratt's a guy that I'm bringing in to sort of be the wingman to Drake May long term, and then we'll see how he develops. To me, it's a lot like, he reminds me a lot of Matt Hasselbeck when he was with the Packers, and the Packers ended up eventually trading him to Seattle and being a good pro. Pratt, he's that type of quarterback, and he has that opportunity.
So look at these drafts, and Greg, by the way, went all offense. Didn't have any time for a defensive pick. Get out of my face with that. I think when you look at drafts, the easiest way to say, oh, I like that or I don't like that, to me, it comes down to like the first 3 picks, the first 3 rounds, and how you would feel. Because honestly, once you get to round 4, it's pretty much throwing darts, and who knows. So I would say I would lean towards Greg's draft because I feel better about Suamataia than I feel about Caden Wallace. And so that's the decider for me is, and the ability to get Johnny Wilson. Again, we don't know Javon Baker. He could end up being an absolute stud, or the character stuff could end up popping up and he could be a miss, and Johnny Wilson could be a stud. So I'm just going off the top 3 picks, and I'm going with Suamataia over Wallace. So I would lean towards Greg's part. All right, let's go to the Tom Brady roast. Before we get there, I want to remind you this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the app today. Use that code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. You can check Greg out as well at BSJ for $50 on the year. Him and Giardi doing work. Corrales on the Celtics. Haggerty on the Bruins. What a win last night by the Bees. So check them out, $50 for the year. All right, Greg, before we say goodbye to the peeps today, your thoughts on the Tom Brady roast?
I thought it was unbelievable, and I thought it was great. It so far exceeded my expectations. I mean, I just figured Tom Brady and a roast, and buttoned up Tom Brady, he's not going to really subject himself to it's probably going to be pretty lame. I mean, this was ridiculous. And I've watched a lot of the Comedy Central roasts over the years. I love them. Certainly, I'm surprised that you can still do humor like this in today's day and age. I thought it was over as far as being, so far gone from PC culture. It just started. I couldn't believe Brady subjected himself to this. He was an executive producer on this, so I assume he saw a lot of the jokes and things like that. I don't know if there's been more reporting on this, but I thought it was great. I thought, Nikki Glaser is one of my favorites. She's awesome at these roasts. If you didn't know Nikki Glaser before from some of the other roasts, go back and watch her. She's unbelievable. Yeah. But I mean, Drew Bledsoe was awesome. Belichick was awesome. Edelman was really good. I couldn't believe the amount of Aaron Hernandez jokes, and it was outside of Randy Moss and Ben Affleck. It was completely entertaining from start to finish. I thought it was awesome. Sam Jay, the professional comedian, some of them whom I've never heard of. It was, if you haven't seen it yet, you got to see it. I don't know how you feel about the whole Patriots element. I know some people are just they take X, Y, and Z away from it. I'm glad there were a ton of Guerrero jokes. That tickled my funny bone for sure. Alex certainly liked those jokes a little bit too much. He probably went home and cried after it. But I thought it was awesome. It was incredible. Kudos to everybody involved. Kevin Hart, the host, Ross, everybody. Brady's first subjecting himself to that, and all the Giselle and Jiu-Jitsu jokes. I mean, it was incredible. It was awesome. Thanks for putting that together, because I haven't laughed like that in a long time.
I loved it. I loved so much of it, and I had the same concerns that you had, and I think a lot of the other people, a lot of other people had the same concerns, which was, is this going to be, sanitized, homogenized, corny ass roast where it's just a bunch of chuckle, ha ha, bad jokes. They're not going to touch sensitive things. And right out of the gate, you knew it. When Kevin Hart, right out of the gate, fired some shots, and I said, all right, game on. You start telling the jiu-jitsu jokes and the being a bad father jokes and Hernandez jokes right out the gate. This is going to be that kind of roast. And so I thought they really lived up to the standard of what a roast is. And if people were offended, do not spend time watching comedy shows. Do not spend time watching roasts, because that is the essence of a roast, folks. That's what they do. So if you don't like it, then just stay away from it. But I thought it was tremendous, and I can't agree more with Glazer. I thought Julian Edelman is her spirit animal apparently when it comes to comedy, because some of the things that he said. I thought Moss was not good. I thought Gronk was just way off the rails, which I didn't find too entertaining. I thought he lost himself and spent way too much time up there. Affleck was awful. Ben Affleck was terrible. That was brutal to watch. But overall, man, just great. And really, I was thinking about this yesterday. It cements to me who Tom Brady is. And what I mean by that is, like, a lot of people hear tales, and Greg has heard, I'm sure, lots of tales behind the scenes about Brady and how he would hang out with his teammates and how he was one of the guys. And they showed you the quick video when he was at his condo drunk one night, and it was, he's hanging out with his boy. But that's really how people talk about him. And I thought in two ways. The people that were on the dais, the former players, I loved it that he had several offensive linemen there. I think Lonnie Paxton was there, which, by the way,
was he in the hat? Was he in the hat?
People might not know. Like,
Lonnie
Paxton, Brady was Lonnie Paxton's guy. Like, when Brady was first in the league, those guys hung out all the time together. So the fact that he had Lonnie there, and Tampa Bay, he had Levante David was there, who's a linebacker. Willie, obviously, Rodney. I thought it showed you how the greatest quarterback of all time related to everybody on his team, or almost everybody. Offensive linemen, skill position players, defensive players. He was just one of the guys. And I think he showed that by how he handled this entire thing, especially how he finished, which I thought he was strong at the end. But also just the fact, like you said, Greg, he allowed himself to take these bullets. And you have to have self-awareness and a level of humility to be like, yeah, I'm going to allow these people to just destroy me and bring up every possible thing that people say about me, that people think I'm like defensive about. I'm going to let it roll. And I thought that showed you that he's a guy who is, look, is he me and Greg? Of course not. He's Tom freaking Brady. But given the circumstances, he's a pretty grounded guy. And he's able to kind of laugh at himself, and he was in on the joke. And I just thought it was great. I agree with you.
Yeah, for sure. I will say I was highly disappointed that Dan Koppen, who was on the dais, like, there was no joke about Dan Koppen. Like, Lonnie Paxton got mentioned at one point. I think about Super Bowl rings. I think that might have been Randy Moss that made that joke. But we couldn't get one Koppen joke. I mean, Matt Light got roasted a few times. Like, we couldn't get, like, Tom liked to linger under center a little bit too much with Koppen. Like, it's something along those lines. But the other thing I wanted to bring up was the Robert Kraft, Bill Belichick stuff, the interactions. Man, it is frost. I love the Belichick dynasty joke. That was awesome. I wish he delivered it a little bit better, but that was awesome. But that was Kraft forcing the Belichick thing and the shots. Like, it's obvious. Belichick freaking hates Kraft, wants to have nothing to do with him. And that was awesome to watch.
Yeah, I thought it was the most memorable moment of the night because it was just totally unexpected. Like, and there's no doubt Belichick was awkward and did not want to be involved. But I give him credit. He went up there in the spirit of it and said, okay, I'm not going to embarrass Kevin Hart. I'll do it. I'll go through this whole thing. I thought, Robert, you and I have talked about this, Greg. Robert, when he gets going, he gets going. He tends to get rolling. And he probably should have just stayed away from the microphone because the fawning over Belichick, when you just fired the guy a few months ago, it is very transparent. And I thought Robert went too far trying to get people to buy into the moment instead of just letting it be and just taking the shot and walking. He had to be, he had to sit there and, the greatest coach of all time is. Just take the shot. Take the shot and exit stage left. We appreciate you, Robert, but come on now. Great overall, though. All right, he's Greg. I'm Nick. I got to go have lunch. We'll talk to you later in the week. Until then, be well.